I think I need to cut down on my screen time, honestly. Hold on. You give me 1 second. I need some childish joy in my life. Hold on. You guys will get a kick out of this. I love this mug. My wife is an incredible person for giving this to me. Yeah. That's the thing with online classes. I kind of feel like I'm always rooted to a screen, and the headaches it gives me are just so aggressive and mean, and I feel like I've got like baseball bats slamming against the inside of my head. So it's time to move on to a different assignment. Let's change the gears on this a little bit. And we're going to turn away from the more creative writing. I think we've done enough of that. And now we're going to shift back into a little bit more of a research type thing. And rather than give you a bunch of instructions just at the beginning of this video, what I would like to do is I'd like to talk to you about the nature of research itself and the annotated bibliography, which we're going to be doing. But we're going to come into this from a very sideways sort of entry. Like, we're not going to just come in with the same baseball bat just smashing everything. We're going to take this with a little bit of nuance. So research is actually usually something that I very much enjoy talking about. In fact, I actually have a chapter in a book I published that was published a long time ago called the New Digital Scholar. And it was probably like the greatest thing I ever did in my career, which is really something you don't want to have behind you when you're 36, which is like, oh, well, that's over and done with. Oh, dear God. Yeah, coffee. Anyway, so I wrote this chapter, and it was about this really strange kind of classroom procedure setup thing I did long time ago. It would have worked really well with online classes too, but unfortunately the software that I used went kaput, so it doesn't really exist the same way that it used to. But within the course of writing that chapter about that teaching method, I came across a very interesting concept called power browsing. Now, power browsing is something that a lot of people do, but it's especially something that students end up doing when they have an assignment. And the concept basically goes like this. So a teacher walks into the classroom and gives you an assignment where you're supposed to write a research paper, right? And the research paper has, maybe a couple of topics you're supposed to choose from. And these topics, can include anything from like abortion to taxes to gun control, all that political stuff we've already worked with. When you choose that topic, the way people typically handle that topic is, and by the way, I need to give credit where credit's due. This idea was introduced to me by Randall McClure, who was a really big mentor of mine when I was still teaching at Georgia Southern University. Power browsing is this idea that you get a topic like that, you typically just immediately know that was a loud snap, sweet. You immediately know exactly what you want to do. You know what you want to say. You have an opinion already kind of formulated on it, right? And so what students typically do is you go to Google, you find a whole bunch of stuff that matches up with your opinion. That's already pretty well set in stone, right? You find those sources and you make them match your opinion. You find stuff that tailor fits to already the ideas that you have brewing within your head, and you cobble together a paper pretty quickly, right? Now, for most students in most classrooms, this ends up being a pretty effective way of writing a research paper because they can get the B or the A just by doing that. And that for Randall and, well, me, that is actually extremely problematic. Research is not supposed to be about going and finding information that matches your viewpoint. That defeats the purpose of research. Research is about to be discovering something new, learning something that was outside your purview of knowledge. And the way that most students attack this type of thing is to simply shoehorn it into their view of the world that they've already established for themselves. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is because I actually think this is a serious problem. And I think this is one of the reasons why research papers themselves typically don't really do what instructors want them to do. In order to write a truly effective, truly transformative research paper, you have to model for your students, and you have to model a good, solid relationship with research and a relationship with data. Coffee is my lifeline right now. This is some good coffee too. I mean, Ayla Sakura here agrees. I think that's Ayla Sakura. Anyway, I need to I'll have to look that up later because now I'm not sure. Anyway, you have to model a good positive relationship with research. And for most English instructors, that's something we're kind of hesitant to do, precisely because it's difficult. In order to do a really good research project, you've got to do lots of reading, and you've got to have an open mind towards it. And really, I think the best way of handling something like this is to pick a topic that's extremely in the polemic, something that's happening right now. Did you guys ever have that? Usually it's a coach. Have a coach in high school that you had some type of class with and you had to write current events. I don't know why coaches always did that assignment, but they always did. We had to write current event stuff where you look up something in the news and you'd write a kind of summary of what's going on. That's actually a really, really good way of doing research. But the problem is that for the most part, when we do that current event style assignment, we don't really laser focus it, right? Now, imagine this for a minute. Imagine you pick a topic like abortion. I know I always talk about abortion, but let's face it, it's like the universal topic that everybody at least has some skin in the game in. That was a really poor choice of words. Jesus Christ, David. I'm live streaming this too, so I can't come. Anyhow, neither here nor there. If you follow abortion in the news and you look at stuff that's happening right now with it, your opinion of abortion, or at least your viewpoint of abortion, can actually change really quick. Maybe not change, but can you'll notice that the conversation that exists around this issue is much different than what happens when you get out of bed and you have your straight up ingrained opinion about it. All of a sudden, we're talking about court cases. We're talking about regulations that are being passed in Texas. We're talking about Supreme Court nominations. So that all of a sudden, we're not just talking about whether abortions are good or abortions are bad. We're talking about whether a court decision is a good one or a bad one, right? That's the kind of transformative process that we can have when we take an honest, developed look at our research. Now, power browsing has left us with another interesting problem that I think is a lot older than the internet. So let me get off the beaten path here for a minute and go way into theory, because I'm sure you guys have noticed, for me, like, weird theoretical stuff is like the candy that I feed my brain. Now, we live in an age where some people have called our information ecosystem the post-truth world. You ever had that coffee that's been in the burner for like 4 hours and it tastes like engine degreaser and you're just like, ah! And you're like, I got to get me more of that, right? That's good stuff. It doesn't get any better than that crazy engine degreaser coffee. Anyway, how on earth have we ended up in a post-truth environment where we all are continuously doubting the sources of our information? And even when you would think it's something that would be as simple as statistics regarding job data, all of a sudden we're all arguing over this stuff as to what it really means. Is it as bad as the Congressional Budget Office is saying it is? Are the Poindexters that work at the universities, are they telling us the truth? We constantly have this battle in our heads where we have to decide whether our source of information is reliable or not. Where on earth did this come from, and how did we end up here? Believe it or not, I think the source of this kind of doubt that's been festering in our information ecosystem actually has far older roots. And it'd probably be really hard to track it down, because the real doubt comes from something I like to call common experience. Now, let's take a moment and define this for a minute. And in order to do that, I'm going to have to tell you a little bit about your research sources, because this is actually really important. When we do research, when we take data, what we do is we differentiate between two sources of information, and we really relegate it to these two different sources. You can identify them as this or that. We've got primary sources. Primary sources are first-hand accounts of events, right? I was there, I'm involved in it somehow. An example of a primary source would be an advocate for gun control, somebody on the street when a riot broke out, a firefighter on 9/11. These are all primary sources. These are all people who have seen and experienced the thing. But then we have, there's my voice. Then we have secondary sources. Now, secondary sources are when there is no primary experience. There's no firsthand experience of the thing that is being discussed. Right? It's got distance between the person discussing it and the subject involved. Now, the example of this would be a researcher at a university that's looking at a bunch of primary sources and putting together a text or an article that's trying to ascertain some kind of like synthesis between them, right? Or somebody who's writing a dissertation and is trying to get some balance between a whole bunch of other studies. Now, this is where things kind of get interesting. Academia, colleges, universities have always trusted secondary sources over primary. This can throw people for a loop. We often the person who was there can give us the best idea of what actually happened, right? When we go to court, we often talk to people who witnessed the thing. But in actuality, the problem with that thinking is that often firsthand accounts, people who are involved in the issue being discussed, either have an agenda or they often can't give us the story in a way that is unfiltered through their own experience, right? They're not objective. Now, this isn't to say that there's no value to primary sources, but academia is very suspicious of those sources. If you want to trust a source of information, you want to go to someone who has already put the work in to filter it. You want somebody who's acting in a secondary capacity and is trying to assert the authority to say, this is true, this is not. Now, secondary sources are often vetted, like meaning most of the things that I would identify as secondary sources, studies and things like that, they get published in academic journals, which we'll have a whole other video about academic journals later. But academic journals typically have a panel of experts in the subject, people who are like doctoral, people who have their doctorate degrees, people who are experts in the field, people who have earned prestige, so that you have this veneer that when you have a journal of ethics or a journal of economics or a journal of literature, you've got a panel of people who are all looking at it and verifying the authority of it, right? The truthfulness of it or the value of the argument. So secondary sources are considered to be the authoritative sources for the most part. And again, we can get into kind of an argument about whether a secondary source is making the correct assumption. We can have a conversation about that. Now, here's where things get interesting. As the internet has grown, so has the number and the intensity of conspiracy theories. Now, I'm not going to argue like too terribly much about the veracity of any conspiracy theory. That's not my goal. But I will say, as someone who studies conspiracy theories, I'm always incredibly suspicious of a conspiracy theory, no matter what it is. If it has that veneer to it, I am immediately going to be extremely skeptical of it because of the nature of what it is. And here's why. Conspiracy theories typically are built upon assumptions. We have to assume a lot in order for the conspiracy theory to be true. Now, conspiracy theories tend to hover and infest information around events of intense common experience. If we've all experienced an event in some capacity together, then it's going to have a heavy weight of conspiracism towards it. One of my two favorite examples of this, the JFK assassination, is probably one of the widest known conspiracy theories of all time. I mean, even as far as the new modern conspiracy theories that we have, like QAnon or the Pizzagate stuff. Now, people watched the JFK assassination. They saw it on TV. They saw the news anchors get choked up with the image of JFK's assassination. Primary sources of secondary sources of information are not supposed to be emotionally invested in the source that's being discussed. Now, I would argue that the media has been horrendously compromised when you see the JFK assassination, because as soon as the journalist reacts emotionally to the event, they now have skin in the game. They've reacted to it. They have an emotional connection to the information that they are giving you. And this undermines their authority. Now, were journalists ever a true secondary source? They're a very weak version of secondary information, mainly because a journalist on a news network or a news show, one of the main things they're trying to sell you is, well, they're trying to sell you stuff, right? News is designed to get you to watch it so that then you watch ads. There's a lot of reasons that news exists other than just the correctness of the information that's being delivered. And that's just kind of the nature of the media. It's always been there. But the JFK assassination all of a sudden yanked these journalists down into the common level of everyone else. You're sad about this too. You're upset about this too. You're just like the rest of us. It took a long time for a truly authoritative secondary source to exist with the Kennedy assassination. And what happened? It was infested with conspiracy theory. It was all over the place. All these conspiracy theories sort of like bubbled up around it. And I think that what ends up happening there is, in the absence of a truly authoritative voice that people trust, the authority is just disseminated out everywhere, right? So anybody can have authority to say all sorts of crazy crap that's full of assumptions. And it ends up being very convincing because we don't have a locus with which to hold on to. Now, look at the moon landing. My father died believing that the moon landing had been faked. Now, even though it's a very different kind of event, the moon landing has a lot in common with the Kennedy assassination because it was something that they all gathered together to witness, right? Everybody felt a great deal of emotion regarding the moon landing. And so you had the same exact thing where authority around the moon landing is all of a sudden disseminated because it's really hard for us to grab onto a person who isn't directly involved. Even NASA, the people who orchestrated the landing on the moon that we typically look at as experts, their authority was in a sense annihilated because they were involved in it. So many people distrust NASA for so many different reasons. And I would argue that it's probably because they're involved in the things that they're trying to tell you. They retrieved the images. They've created the data. And so we immediately are like, well, I don't trust you. You're involved with it. This distrust of the primariness of the information that's filtering to us still influences our behavior greatly. Now, to bring this all to an interesting point, what is the single greatest locus of conspiracy theories that exists in our common era? In modern. I've had too much caffeine. Ah! Are you awake? Good. You could say that it would potentially be the election of Donald Trump, but I'm going to go farther back than that. We all watched the 2016 campaign and we all reacted to it, right? But I think the grand eclipse that actually broke the knees of our media and our trust of it was actually 9/11. Think about the common emotional experience of 9/11 that we all had. Think about the journalists getting choked up, the involvement in the government in disseminating the data about it. We all immediately had an inborn distrust because the government was the entity that was itself attacked And so the information that we were given to it was basically given to us by people who were affected by it. That immediately sows distrust, whether or not it's merited. That's a really interesting way of looking at conspiracy theories and thinking about, like, well, this stuff kind of grows up in a collectivism of distrust simply because we all have the common experience of it. And 9/11 was a cesspool of conspiracy theories, most of which I've seen have kind of bubbled away. They just sort of faded away. And it's been replaced by this new wave of conspiracy theories that actually seems to have latched on to the kind of emotional common experience of the election of Donald Trump. That's the thing that kind of brings these things out in us. When the center of authority is lost, we all have more of a right to interpret the facts and the data that are coming towards us. And that, it's terrifying, but it's also kind of nice to know that this is what the internet has done. It's made us all weird authorities, but it's made it to where finding that secondary source that we can truly trust is now hopelessly mired in a fog, right? No secondary source, whether it be a media outlet, whether it be a journal in an academic paper, or an academic paper in a journal, whether it be a book, no one is safe from suspicion. No one is safe from, being called out for bias and, just incorrectness. We don't just trust things anymore. Hopefully, we find a way to process this, right? But in order to encounter and give ourselves a little bit more rooted feet in our new horrifying information ecosystem, we've got to become better. We got to create for ourselves a better information diet, right? And I think the biggest enemy of this is the single source of information diet. If you get all your information from one source, you're going to be like information starved, right? It's not enough to just get it from one fire hose. You got to sample a little bit from all over the place. You got to sample different perspectives, and you got to bring all that back together in order to feed your skepticism. Skepticism is the absolute best thing that you can have these days, not because you're not going to believe anything, but you're going to take everything with a grain of salt. You know what? I'm not sure I trust that. I'm not sure I trust that. When I saw, and again, I know you guys have probably noticed that I have a little bit of a left-wing bias, right? When I saw Donald Trump had backed out of the second debate, I didn't immediately believe it. I was like, there's no way. And so I went and I checked multiple news sources, and I looked to see what the buzz was on Twitter, and I'm going to watch my YouTube people later. So I've got a whole bunch of different news feeds that are bringing information to me. There are often times where I watch things with the sole purpose of knowing I'm going to disagree with everything they say, but I still hear them out, right? Because I'm going to give you guys a little piece of, I'm going to confess something to you guys. I hate broccoli. I still eat it occasionally. Do you know why? Because it's good for me, right? I hate it. But I will say this, broccoli cheddar soup, very nice. Unfortunately, the nutrition is completely cooked out of it, which I could make a lot of interesting I could make a lot of interesting metaphors about that, honestly, about getting news that's had all the substance cooked out of it. That's pretty good. And anyway, the diversity of the information diet is something I want to help you guys build. I want you to try out new sources of information. I want you to try on new viewpoints. And that doesn't mean you have to adopt them, but it helps you become more well-rounded and a lot less likely to fall for something if you've got the diverse information diet. For our first discussion question on the forum, which is now going to be the Annotated Bibliography Forum, all I want you to do today is give me a nice solid paragraph about a news story that you did not believe when you saw it. If you want to go looking for one, that's fine too. But I want you to tell me about a story that you did not believe. if it was true, that's fine as well. I would say it's very healthy to not believe something and then check it and find out you're wrong. Do you have any idea how many celebrities have died on my Twitter feed and I've had to go and make sure they were dead? It's pretty grim, right? And then, oh man, Eddie Van Halen. That one hit kind of hard. You know, he was awesome. How weird to find out about things like that from Twitter first. Anyway, I'm getting way off track. I gotta drink some water as opposed to mega caffeine slurry, which I've got in that mug right there. That's all I want you to do for the second half of the week. Give me a paragraph in the Annotated Bibliography Forum about a news story you did not believe. Next week, we're going to start crafting and cobbling together our initial annotated bibliography entries. But I'm the kind of guy that likes you to dip your toes in the water first. All right. Anyhow, I think I'm going to play with my Legos for a while. Thank y'all. Y'all have a lovely weekend.